There have been concerns raised around the state of Joburg's infrastructure. Parts of the city have been without running water due to aging infrastructure. Last year, sections of Lilian Street were ripped up when a gas blast rocked the busy city center. And earlier this week, cables caught fire underground the M1 highway. This is to name but a few issues, which raises the question: is Joburg's infrastructure in a crisis? Well, to help us answer this question, I'm joined by Julia Fish, manager of JoburgCAN, an initiative of Alta. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for your time, Julia. But have you, as an organization, put a finger on the reasons behind what clearly is a rather precarious state of Joburg's infrastructure?
To put it really simply, Vuyo, the city is not spending enough on maintenance. They're directing a lot of the funds that come into the city to pay for perks and for packages to the upper executive, and very little of that is actually going on maintenance and infrastructure spending.
Well, I'm assuming here, because you're so forthright and straight and to the point, that you probably have done some kind of study or comparative studies or some work in this area. Is it something you're able to table before, say, whoever cares to listen, to say, look, I mean, this is what you've done versus what ought to be done, and these are the conclusions we have arrived at?
So the city runs an annual program called the Integrated Development Plan. And that goes along with the tariffs and the budget structure that they then put to the city and say, this is how we're going to spend the money that you're giving us. In that plan, they are supposed to set a national target of meeting 8% of infrastructure and maintenance work. They are currently shooting for a target of only 5.5%. So 8% of the entire budget is supposed to be spent on maintenance. They're not even reaching that. In a 5-year period, they are not even reaching the 1-year annual target for the amount of new pipeline and water infrastructure that they're supposed to be developing. So we have set a very comprehensive response to the city's IDP and budget process. We asked for an extension. That was denied. We have written a 42-page response to how the city are planning to spend their money, where some of the problems are with the money that they're spending, and also part of us, part of the local innovation team at Alta have written a water crisis response that we would very much like other civil society to tie onto, and that is saying you have to ring fence specifically money for water infrastructure in the city, or we're heading for a larger crisis than we're already in.
And the reason, of course, I was asking that question, and perhaps the way I did, is because when you look at, 24 billion rands, which is the amount associated with Johannesburg's infrastructure backlog, that's quite a huge number. But one wonders whether, in fact, that's the money that the city needs to deal with this infrastructure backlog, especially considering the fact that, a simple thing like a bottle of water that costs 5 rands somewhere gets to cost 30 rands, when it's the government that has to pay for it.
Exactly. There's very little transparency and oversight into how some of these contracts are getting paid. We're told that City Power is losing R1 billion a month. That's billion with a B. Joburg Water is losing 300 million rand a month. How much of that is being capitalized through replacing things like breakers or cables and that kind of thing is not transparent. How much we're spending on water tankers in these water crisis times when emergency water is needed for parts of the city, that's also not transparent. So when you look at how the city has set out its budget and how it's reporting back on an annual basis, the mayor in his State of the City address the other day said they're very proud of their unqualified audits, not mentioning that they were massive findings of material non-compliance, and that there's a lot of information there that's missing. And how they report their budgets, they're supposed to say what they've done over the last 2 years and project to the next 3. Those aren't available. the amount of transparency and kicking over of prior applications and multiple things to try and get this information is incredibly difficult. And we're looking at the costs of things ballooning. For instance, the Metro Centre, which is the seat of the city's government, is currently closed. It's very difficult to be able to get a lot of things done and actually talk transparently to people in that building. In order to deliver the state of the city address, they had to hire generators, journalists couldn't get into the room. It was a mess. And none of this is being translated properly. And the cost of having to rehabilitate that building has shot up 4 times in the last 2 years. None of these costs are transparent. And we're absolutely no idea of the true level of rot that's happening in the city, because the year-on-year reports are getting more and more vague.
Is it beyond the purview of organized civil society to then maybe seek outside help? I mean, obviously, where there's no transparency, I mean, we're not going to have the knowledge of the extent of the problem, let alone how to even begin to deal with it. In other words, in addition to your Auditor General reports, for example, to then mobilize business, I mean, audit firms, to try and break these numbers down and give us a clearer and more open sense of what it is exactly that we are dealing with here.
We as JoburgCAN really believe in an idea called co-governance, that we don't expect the city to be able to deal with a historically divided, unequal, and marginalized city on their own. We're mobilizing and resourcing residents associations, ratepayers associations, small to medium enterprises, business, what is called a SID, which is a Central Improvement District. All of these elements can and should be working together to make Joburg the city that can thrive. Instead, obviously, we're having to come up against people getting arrested because they don't have the right way leaves, people not getting way leaves to be able to help. And at the end of the day, people want to get out there. They want to fill their own potholes. They want to paint their own streets, and they're doing it on a day-to-day basis. But they're coming up against the city, who is not necessarily opening their doors to this kind of partnership. And it is very much that this place and the city that we live in, we call home, we live, we work here, our kids go to school here. And therefore, the businesses who have made massive investments in the city don't want to get left with stranded assets. So they're trying to come to the table and promote these kind of solutions like a water crisis action plan. And we just need the city to meet us halfway.
Now, I mean, outside of the money issues, transparency issues, and the like, when it comes to expertise or the ability of the people that Joburg employs to deal with these problems, how do we fare that? Do we have the necessary experience? Do we have the necessary expertise? And I'm asking this because I'm always amazed at how often, at how difficult it is often for the authorities to even speculate on the possibilities of leaks, for example, or some of these accidents. One would have thought that people with experience and expertise should be able to say it's either this or that thing that could be responsible. Of course, the investigations will then follow, but you often don't get that either.
One of the biggest problems in the city of Johannesburg is the way that it's structured. Most of the municipal-owned entities work in silos. So you have a water leak, Joburg Water goes along, they try and fix the solution. But at the end of the day, most of the people working in that team, who's looking at a leak in a street, for instance, they are contractors. They're not internal employees with a supervisor and structure that has, especially if it's a large leak, we've seen really under pressure, massive pipelines, specifically in Parkview and on Jan Smuts, that are very large infrastructure. It's not just the simple pipe going down one residential street. These are interleading locks of different infrastructure and pipelines. And there isn't a supervisor there that is qualified to be able to deal with that kind of pipe under pressure. So we're seeing the same pipe breaking, the fixes not lasting. There's a very limited structure of supervision. But at the same time, we're also getting complaints from a lot of the people who work within the city that they just don't have the support of the higher echelons. So we understand that only 6% of Johannesburg's bridges at the moment are drivable. They are in an emergency state of repair. And we've seen this now with the cable theft that happened alongside the double-decker M1 South the other day, and potential damage to that bridge. And even the engineers who work in the city, who are qualified, who know these spaces, refuse to drive over most of the bridges in the city because they know that they are unstable and in desperate need of repair. Kenny Kuneni, the MMC for Transport, said the same thing. About 6% of the bridges in Joburg are, basically operational. And this should be sounding alarm bells. But instead, we have JRA, Joburg Water, City Power, all who should have had some kind of oversight into what happened on the M1 South the other day, working in completely different departments with completely different oversight structures and with absolutely no overlapping and integration. There are plans to spend a lot of money on systems to be able to integrate some of these, but they're still working very much as their own entities. And there's no one really pushing to insource that work to be able to provide a little bit more oversight and create teams that work across these different entities.
And one wonders then, on the basis of what you've just described, little wonder that there is always a problem of agility in dealing with these accidents.
It's almost a tragedy to call them accidents when everyone has been shouting the alarm bells, saying there is not enough money being spent. Well, there's way too much money being spent in the wrong areas. And multiple different organizations, structures, even the city itself, specifically what happens in the month leading up to a national election is everyone's too busy playing the blame game and saying it's a previous administration, it's another structure, it's a different department. And what we need to do is we need to all stop playing politics. We need to all stop deciding that it's somebody else's fault and take up the mantle and go, it's my responsibility to do something about this.